Okay, we will do just a little bit of review today because here's where we're going to go today. We're going to talk a little bit more about the spiritual beings, because this question's been asked a few times of like, well, so what are demons? Are they fallen angels? Are they something else? What are we talking about? And I'll say at the top, like on a certain level, I don't think it really matters the terminology that you use. I don't think that you're not gonna be cursed or something if you call some creature by the wrong name or whatever. But for clarity's sake, and so that we kind of maybe can map some of the things that go on in the world, I think it's helpful to speak about the biblical vocabulary for the realm of the spirit and the spiritual beings that inhabit it. And the overarching, kind of tongue-in-cheek theme today is that heaven is in fact quite a dangerous place. And that's tongue-in-cheek because when we think of heaven, we think of sort of paradise, we think of where believers go when they die, and maybe the concept of the new heavens, the new earth. But there's another concept of just the heavenly realm. And in that realm dwell a variety of beings. And not all of them benevolent by any stretch. So let's go through some of the biblical vocabulary. One, and this is going to be again by way of review, is the phrase that we've mentioned a few times, the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. And just again, to review this a bit, you can go to Job chapter 1 and verse 6. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Yahweh, and the accuser, Satan or the Satan, also came among them, and then God has this conversation with him. And then down in the second chapter, we see the same language used again. It's just repeated. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Yahweh God, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. We looked at this other passage before in Job chapter 38. And God is asking Job, where were you when the world was made? Of course, it's a rhetorical question. Job was nowhere because Job didn't exist. Job was a human. And so, but he asked this question on what were the bases of the earth sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Of course, that really clearly tells us whatever is referred to by that phrase, sons of God, is not human. So that's review, yes? We kind of all grasp that. So what are these creatures? Well, they are mighty spiritual beings. We might call them angels. But several groups of these beings rebelled against God. The first 11 chapters of Genesis actually record not one, but 3 rebellions against God. Okay? So where would the first rebellion be in Genesis, do you think? The serpent, Genesis 3. There's some being that is represented there by the serpent who is clearly opposed to God. Yes? Okay, when would the second rebellion come, do you think?
Cain.
Okay, yes, Cain. I'm thinking of the spiritual beings. Yeah. So I will go to Genesis 6, and we see the sons of God here mentioned again. The sons of God saw the daughters of men were attractive, they took as their wives, and they chose. Now we walked through this passage a little bit more in depth, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. And we kind of sketched out like one of the interpretations of this that has absolutely no evidence whatsoever. It's just an attempt to retain an overly naturalistic worldview and read it into the Bible. It's not at all what's going on here. But one of the interpretations would be that these are sort of 2 different human bloodlines. The righteous bloodline of Seth is intermarrying with the wicked bloodline of Cain. That's one interpretation. I don't think that's correct. And you can go back and look at our notes from the first time we looked at this, or you can even go back and listen to it because we're putting these online. In any case, what's instead here is that the sons of God, as elsewhere in the scriptures, is referring to a group of spiritual beings. And they commingle with human women, and they create the Nephilim. And we'll talk more about the Nephilim today. So hold that. But this is a rebellion against God, right? The result of this is that every intention and thoughts of his heart is only evil continuing. That's mankind. So the idea here is that these sons of God beings commingled with human peoples, created a line, a corrupted line of half human, half B'nai Elohim beings. And that's a little weird, isn't it?
Very.
To our mindset. But it's the best we've got. The Nephilim, before we get way into them later, the Greek translation of the Old Testament has the word giant there. The Greek word for giants. And again, not comically large, but these are these mighty champion hero tyrants, I think, of ancient times. In any case, there's a rebellion here, okay? Now, in Genesis 11, there's yet another rebellion. And this time you might not see the spiritual aspect of this at first, because it looks like this is a rebellion entirely of human beings. We have the Tower of Babel here, which is to say, in very brief form, it's the human desire to build a human-centric glory, and it's done by making this mighty structure. And implied in the text is that you've got this. It's tyranny and authoritarianism. Why do I say that? Well, because if you know anything about how the ancient peoples built things, you know it was not by like kumbaya cooperative spirit, right? That's not how ancient peoples built things. How did they build things? With slave labor. And so, that's not explicitly here in the text, but it's a pretty safe bet, I would say. Now, God doesn't like what's going on here in Genesis 11. And so, the Lord dispersed them over the face of the earth, and they left off building the city. So, they're scattered. And we are given the theological interpretation of this event in Deuteronomy chapter 32, where Moses says, "Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations, ask your father and he'll show you, your elders and they will tell you. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, and he divided mankind," that's Genesis 11, "he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God." Okay, there's that phrase again, the sons of God. So now what's going on here? Well, you might say there's two different groups of B'nai Elohim mentioned in Genesis. There's a group in Genesis 6 that leaves heaven, as it were, and comes down and commingles with the human race and messes with human bloodlines in whatever way that happened, and I don't know how that happened. And that group then corrupts mankind, and God wipes it out in the flood. I don't think that it's the same group that God gives jurisdiction over the nations to in Genesis 11. Does that make sense? So here we have a group of these beings, the sons of God, and they are given jurisdictional authority over various places, nations of the earth. And then the question becomes, for what purpose? Well, when we go to Psalm 82, and we see this judgment of Yahweh God over the gods. An interesting thing is, there's no indication in this psalm of when this occurred, right? And I'm not going to suggest that I know when it occurred, but the idea is that you have these gods. And I would say, well, what are the gods? Well, the gods are, I think, the sons of God, given jurisdictional authority over the nations. And now, Yahweh God, the true God, God, capital G God, is pointing his finger at them and saying that they have not done what they are supposed to do. Does that make sense? What are they supposed to do? Judge justly. They're supposed to not show partiality. They're supposed to give justice to the weak and fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and destitute, rescue the weak and needy, deliver the hand of the wicked, give them knowledge and understanding. So, in other words, I would say that the peoples are given to the jurisdiction of these spiritual beings, presumably, and we're in a little bit of speculation here, that they should point the nations back to Yahweh God, because they rejected him at the Tower of Babel. They threw off God. That humanity didn't want to be under God. So he says, fine, you won't be under me. You'll be under these other beings. And maybe the intent of that is that those beings are supposed to point the people back to Yahweh God, and then they don't. Instead, they become corrupt, and they twist the people to worship them instead. And now you have idolatry. You have the worship of the gods that then plays out throughout the whole entire Old Testament. Okay, I'll pause there. Any questions or thoughts on any of that? Yeah, Nate?
Worship of the gods.
Yeah.
But it's not specifically the ones that were supposed to point men back to God.
Well,
So
it could be that you've got beings that are supposed to point people back. So let's say that I'm one of these pictures, and you all are Tower of Babel, rebels. And so God puts me in charge. And my job is to point you back to Yahweh God. And instead, I go power hungry, and I start presenting myself to you as God. And I receive your worship for myself.
As
Okay.
Baal or Molech
Yes,
or
or
okay.
Zeus. Yeah, or Jupiter, or Ra, or whoever. So it's an interesting thing, because when we ask this question, are the pagan gods real? That's a weird question. It's a tough question to answer, right? Because what I would say is, so if I were to ask the question this way, is the human conception of the pagan gods correct? And I would say no. So the pagan gods do not exist how humans think they exist, how pagans think that they exist. That's not quite the same thing as that of saying they don't exist at all. So in other words, I might say Zeus is nothing like what the Greeks thought he was. In fact, I doubt his name was Zeus. But I do think there was some spiritual being that was all too happy to masquerade as Zeus and receive the worship of the Greek peoples. And that being is not capital G God. That being is a B'nai Elohim, a son of God, this type of creature, a mighty spiritual being that is corrupt, power hungry, and perpetuator of idolatry. Is that?
So they went rogue.
Yes, and that's what
God
I'm saying.
created them and
There's
they,
3 rebellions against God. The serpent, I think the devil rebels against God. He's the prime evil. He's the first one. Then a set of sons of God descend and engage in sexual intercourse, or mess with DNA and genetics, or somehow fiddle with human bloodlines and create Nephilim. That's a second rebellion. Then another group of B'nai Elohim are given jurisdictional authority over the nations who don't want to be under Yahweh's reign, and they become corrupt and twist the nations to worship them as God. So I think that's, okay, here's my point, is that Genesis is describing for us the world's a huge mess. And you're like, why? Well, because there's rebellion against Yahweh everywhere.
wow.
Are they the third that fell with?
Oh, yes, let's do that. Great. So let's go to Revelation 12. Oh, man, here we go. So, all right, here we go. This is, you've thrown me off my train track here. That's okay. We're supposed to do that in discussion together. So here's Revelation 12.
Way to go.
And I'm just giving a little thing here. At some point, maybe I'll teach a class on Revelation. I did teach a class on Revelation for our Joy group. It took us more than a year to go through it. I have 300 plus pages of notes. So there's a lot to it. And I'm gonna try to give you like a 5-minute take on Revelation 12, okay? So I think the first 6 verses of Revelation 12 describe the gospel, okay? I'm not going to try to even like validate or justify my interpretation here. I'm just gonna state what I think it is, okay? Is that fair? So I think
For
that
now.
the woman here is the believing community, Old and New Testament, okay? I think that in the sense that what Paul will say in Galatians 4, he'll say that Jerusalem above, and by Jerusalem he means just the believing people group, he'll say she is our mother. So he refers to the overall, we'd say New Testament language, church, but the congregation of God is a she, and we are all her children. Does that make sense? And I think that's the woman here. And so, she's clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, her crown at 12 stars. She's presented, by the way, as the bride of God, which, again, is the church. It's the believing community.
So, can I, are
Yep.
the 12 stars representative of the 12 tribes?
Well, you could say 12 tribes, which is itself a symbol of just the whole number of the people of God, is what I think there. And again, there's a whole bunch of debate there, and that's my take. Okay, so she's pregnant, she's crying out birth pains, and in the agony of giving birth. So I think this is a picture of the gospel. The believing remnant community of the Old Testament is a she. And that community, as a whole group, brings about the advent of Messiah, and he's born, okay? I think that's the obvious giving birth to a male child, well, verse 5, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Who can that be besides Jesus, right? So, at the same time there's another sign appeared in heaven, a great red dragon, and he wants to devour this son. And you could see that in immediate sense. Herod I don't think Herod is the dragon, but Herod is kind of the talon, as it were, of the dragon there, because Herod's trying to literally kill Jesus while he's still a baby, right? She gives birth, and the woman fled into the wilderness. Well, before you get there, she gave birth, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. So when did that happen? The ascension of Christ. So I think what's happening there is right there in verse 5, you just have essentially like the bookends of Jesus' life, representative of his whole life, right? So the whole gospel is present there, I think, in verse 5, is that her child was born and then caught up to God. Now, a whole lot happened in between that, but I think it's all in there. And then the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Now, verse 7. War arose in heaven. I think the war arises on account of what John just saw, namely the gospel. Okay? Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, and he was defeated. There's no longer any place for them in heaven. He was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. And he's thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and power and kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. Okay, beautiful passage. It's really worth a lot more time than we can give it today. This is the source of the idea that there's like a third of the angels rebelled with the devil. But I don't think that this is talking about Genesis 3. So to answer the question of, did a third of the angels like follow Satan like initially in the garden? I don't know. I don't think that's what Revelation 12 is saying, and nowhere else in the Bible says that. So it's not that it's wrong, it's just I can't prove it anywhere. The other problem is that this vision of the dragon's tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to earth. There's a lot of debate. That's where the third of the angels thing comes from. because, you know, the stars of heaven might be there symbolic of angels. That's one of the ways that angels are symbolized in the Bible in general and in Revelation in particular. But it's not, you know, it's not for sure. So I don't know. I don't know how many of the angels follow the devil, but some number of them do. I guess I could say that. Is that a fair, short answer there? I don't know if it was 5 minutes or not. Okay, so there's the rebellions. Now, the reason I think it's important that we kind of understand there's two different groups of these beings is that some of these beings were imprisoned after Genesis 6. If we go to the book of Jude, Jude is this really odd book. It's only one chapter, and Jude is writing to his audience, basically telling them, like, don't give in to false teaching. Be careful, contend for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. Okay, that's his main thesis. And then he gives a whole bunch of examples of, you know, times where people didn't, you know, sort of stay in their lane, remain faithful to God, keep to truth, and he's just giving these rapid fire examples. And in this rapid fire group, he references these angels. He says that angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he is kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. And then he compares these angels, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which, like those angels, indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire. So what does that sound like to you? It sounds like Genesis 6, okay? My point is, the sons of God that did the Genesis 6 thing, I think God imprisoned them. Perhaps in the flood, even. I'm not sure how, but I think that's what Jude is saying. Is that making sense? It would be more like instead of like purgatory, it'd be like the Greek concept of like Tartarus. It's like a prison, like Tartarus, like prison of the gods. Actually, not the gods. In the Greek mythology, it's the prison of the Titans, who the gods fought, you know, first. But it would be more like that type of thing. Now, side note is that one of the things that Revelation says, you know, happens at some point, I think, is that God actually sets those critters loose as part of the judgment on the earth. It's a whole different conversation, which I don't think is yet. But anyway, so you've got that group of angels, or we might say fallen angels there, because he calls them angels. Does that make sense? So I think, that's why I can say, I think you can call the B'nai Elohim, the Hebrew phrase there, the sons of God, you can call them angels. Just knowing that there might be actually a couple of different kinds of angels, and that's okay.
So is this gloomy place like a part of the spiritual heaven, or is it
Well,
separate from that?
yeah, it depends. So, like many words, the word heaven in biblical usage can mean many different things. Heaven can mean simply the sky,
Right.
or what we might consider to be like outer space. Heaven can mean like the realm of the Most High God specifically, where we would be saying, like in the New Testament, says like paradise, like heaven in a good. Then there's also the idea of heavens as just the spiritual realm, and that doesn't have a kind of moral connotation at all. It just is a different. It's like a different biome. You know, it's just a different
dimension.
Yeah, so let me just really quick, Ephesians chapter 6, and we see this, what do we wrestle against? He says here, the spiritual forces of evil where? Heavenly places. Okay, that's the tongue in cheek. Heaven's a dangerous place. Spiritual forces of good? No, evil. In the heavenly places. That is, they are not paradise, you know, God's house.
Not the throne room.
Right. But, and, you know, this is kind of the idea of, there are places where there's like a geography of heaven in some sense. If I go to 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul says, he's boasting, you know, he's doing his boasting thing. And he says, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. What the heck is that? By the way, I know a guy. It's Paul. So what's the third heaven? Well, he's referring to a Jewish concept there of like you have tiers of heaven. And the idea would be that like the third heaven is like the most high place. That's where God lives. That's where Yahweh God lives. And the lower places in the heavens are where other creatures live. And some of those creatures are not friendly creatures. You can also see this geography thing in Ephesians chapter 1 when Paul says down here, according to the working of his great might of God, that he worked in Christ when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places. And then look, it's a preposition. It's a spatial preposition, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion. So heaven has a geography, is what I'm saying. And geography is a weird word because geography usually refers to a physical plane of Earth. But are you tracking with this? The heavens are filled with all kinds of creatures, and they're not by any stretch all good creatures. Okay, now, so the Genesis 6 group imprisoned somewhere. I don't know where. I don't even know how you talk about a where in heavenly geography. I don't know.
Yeah.
But somewhere, and they're imprisoned. They're bound in chains and gloomy darkness. That's what Jude says. Okay, but the other group, the Genesis 11 group, I don't think that those were bound in chains and gloomy darkness there. Okay, why do I think that? Well, because the New Testament terms for those jurisdictional powers, the New Testament has terms for that. In fact, we actually see some right here in Ephesians 1. Rule, authority, power, dominion. Those are actually, or if we go back to Ephesians 6, rulers, authorities, cosmic powers, and spiritual forces of evil. So those are some terms. Or if we go to Colossians chapter 2, we've looked at this passage before. He disarmed the rulers and authorities. So like what rulers and authorities? Well, he's not talking about human rulers. He's talking about what? Like spiritual rulers and authorities. And then you think, rulers of what? The nations. The gods. The gods of the nations. Okay, are we all on board so far? Okay, so why is this important? Because I think it is the case that when we talk about the question, are the gods real? There is a way that we could say, no, they're not real, in the sense that if I were talking to like a Norse pagan, I would say to that person, Odin is, the conception that you have of Odin is not real. That is not at all the same thing as saying that there are no spiritual entities that are of great power and malevolence that masquerade as gods. So there's some creature underneath the Norse conception of Odin that is all too happy to receive the worship of Norse people as Odin. Whether or not that being's name is Odin or not, I suspect it's probably not. But that being is real, okay? I hope I'm not sounding like a polytheist, that's not what I'm saying. But there are beings, okay, and they're not non-existent fictions, but they are real powers. So let me show you a place here's a weird story, okay? So 2 Kings chapter 3. So this is a story where Moab, They're having a lot of fun out there, which is good, which is really good. So Moab rebels against Israel, sorry. And part of this is the kings of Israel and Judah are both, like Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, is not so bad, but he's a little bit arrogant. And Jehoram, the king over Israel, he's very bad. Right? We see this here. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Not quite like his father and mother, but he does evil. Now, the king of Moab rebels, and so they go to battle, they do all their thing. And we scroll all the way down here, and the people of Israel go and fight against the king of Moab. And so they lay siege to this city. They stop every spring of water, they fell all the good trees, and they're surrounding this city. Then look in verse 26. When the king of Moab saw the battle was going against him, he took with him 700 swordsmen to break through opposite the king of Edom, but they could not. So they are losing this battle. Then he took his oldest son, who was to reign in his place, and he offered him for a burnt offering on the wall. So he sets his son on fire as an offering to the pagan god of Moab. And there came great wrath against Israel. So they withdrew from him and returned to their own land. So the very clear implication of this weird story is that the king of Moab makes a deal with the pagan god of Moab, and it works.
Oh, it's not supposed to.
Because
do
Israel wasn't necessarily fighting for
Yeah,
Yahweh.
so you might
So
say that.
it's one against the other.
Yes, well, in fact, it's not even maybe that. It's maybe like the god of Moab against the people of Israel. And in that equation, the people of Israel lose. And I think that's probably what you're saying. I must have misunderstood. But yes, okay, so the point, now, relevant, practical point here is that, like, here's a biblical story. Like, somebody's making a deal with the devil. Like, they literally making an oath deal. And further, it's like, okay, go ahead, yeah.
So, verse 27, the he is the king of Moab,
Mhm,
and he took his oldest son
mhm.
and offered him as a burnt offering to
To the, like, what, it doesn't say to
whatever
who.
reigning being.
Yeah, it could be to Molech, it could have been to Chemosh, it could have been like to one of the gods of Moab.
Okay,
One of those evil.
Yeah.
and the great wrath is not coming from God, it's coming from.
Well, so, right, and so some people, there's different interpretations of this, and some people say the great wrath against Israel is the wrath of Yahweh God. I don't think that that's likely, because whenever the Bible says that God is angry with his people and renders judgment on them, it'll tell you that very explicitly. It'll say, like, this happened because they rebelled against, Yahweh, their God. And it's always very clear with that. The other interpretation people give here is that the great wrath against Israel, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. There is a way that's super thin, I think, to understand the word wrath as like emotional angst. And the idea is, and this is, again, it's just like, there are some people that are so desperate to hold on to the naturalistic, like, worldview, where we believe in God and nothing else, that we'll insert things here. So then what the interpretation then becomes, Israel sees the desperate lengths that they have pushed their enemy to because of their own brutality. They see that they have pushed Moab so hard that the king of Moab is now burning his own son. And that causes them like an emotional distress. And that's the great wrath against Israel. And so they withdraw from the battle and they say, let's give up on this because this is becoming too escalated or something. I think that's a wild stretch there. I think it's more straightforward to say, this guy makes a deal with Chemosh or Molech or whoever, and the price, here's the practical point, because people make oaths to dark powers today. Like, this is a thing. And like demons or gods or whatever always charge a price. Okay? Like, this is a very anti-gospel thing. Right? Because Jesus says, let all who are thirsty come and take from the river of the water of life without cost. Actually, with a great cost, and it's him. The pagan gods, they say, well, I'll do something for you, but it's going to cost you. Okay? But this is, all I'm saying there is that this is an example, like the gods are real, and they're not to be fiddled with. Because it is possible to make a deal with the devil, as it were. Okay? So there's part of the vocabulary. We've got angels, like kind of fallen angels, gods, sons of God, that whole thing. Okay? Now, none of those beings are demons. Okay? So let's go down that path. So the demons thing, or the other term for demons in the New Testament is unclean spirits. Okay? So they go back to the Nephilim. All right? So if we go back to Genesis 6, I'm going to go slow through this because I'm just going to tell you, there's a bunch of synonyms here, and you do not need to get tripped up by all the synonyms. There's lots of Hebrew words that are all referring to one basic reality, okay? And I'll try to make that very clear, and I'll go slow, and if you need to stop and ask a question, clarify, that's totally fine. So we get this commingling of sons of God and human women, and as a consequence, as a result of that, we get the Nephilim. And we are told that these are mighty men, ancient mighty men of renown. This would be like ancient hero, champion, but not hero in a good sense, like just hero in the sense of being like mighty. Again, you might think of this as like, perhaps there's some kernel of truth in the ancient stories of like the demigods, as it were. Something like that. But they do not lead humanity in a good direction. They lead to verse 5, the Lord saw the wickedness of man's great in the earth, and every intention and thought of his heart was only evil continually. So what I think is, these ancient heroes of old were actually tyrants. Like tyrant kings. And humanity in general, and Israel in particular, later fought against the offspring of these beings. Okay? One of the things we're told here in Genesis 6 is that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. Which days? The days immediately preceding the flood. And also afterward. And we're not told, like, how did they survive the flood? I don't know. Or did they survive the flood? Maybe not. And then somehow, there was a second time that these sons of God beings commingled with women. We don't know. But we're just told here that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, immediately preceding Noah and the flood, and also afterward. And then later, the people of Israel have to fight against the descendants of these beings. So, there are multiple synonyms that all refer to the descendants of the Nephilim. Okay? So if we go to Numbers chapter 13, this is where the people of Israel, they've gotten to the edge of the promised land, and they send 12 spies in to spy out the land. And they come back, and Caleb and Joshua are like, let's go. The Lord is with us. And the other 10 are like, let's not. It's terrifying. And so, verse 31, the men who had gone up with him, that is Caleb, said, we are not able to go up against these people, for they are stronger than we are. So, they brought the people of Israel back report of the land. And they said, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim. And then we're given this little parenthetical statement. Well, actually, the sons of Anak. who came from the Nephilim. And we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. So, again, there, a clear statement as to the physical stature of these creatures. Okay? They make humans, they made the regular Israelite humans look small. I don't know how small, but small, noticeably small. And notice here that we are given the first synonym for this. The Nephilim are also called the sons of Anak. Now, an interesting little thing in Hebrew, this, the I-M on the end of a word just makes a word plural. That's how Hebrew makes words plural. The Nephilim, it's a plural word. So, if you were to take Anak and all of the descendants of Anak and refer to that plural group, you would say Anakim. Yes? The Anakites, the Anakim. And that's exactly the term that we see used in Deuteronomy. So if we go to Deuteronomy chapter 2, what's going on in Deuteronomy chapter 2 is Moses is recounting to the generation of Israel that is preparing to actually enter the promised land. He's recounting to them the last 40 years of their history coming out of Egypt, okay? And the various trials that they went through, battles that they fought, and things they had to overcome. So, but he gives instructions to them not to be antagonistic toward a couple of groups of people. The first one is Moab. He says, "The Lord said to me, do not harass Moab or contend with them in battle, for I will not give you any of their land for possession, because I have given Ar to the people of Lot for a possession." That is the Moabites. And then this little parenthetical statement. The Emim formerly lived there, a people great and many and tall, like the Anakim. Like the Anakim, they are also counted as Rephaim. But the Moabites, they just call them Emim. Okay? Multiple terms, all referring to the same type of person. Okay? I'm going to go slow there. Do you understand what's going on there?
Yeah.
There is a group, and I'll zero in on this term right here, Rephaim. That's the most important term that we'll carry forward. There are lots of other terms, groups, that are grouped under that term. So Emim they're Rephaim, and also the Anakim, they're also Rephaim. There's multiple synonyms. You might say it like this. It's like there's a big category that we call Nephilim, or synonym Rephaim. That's a big category. And under that category, there's these smaller clan groups that live in different locales. Emim, there's another one that we come down here. The Ammonites, the Zamzumim. And they too are a people, great and many, and tall, like the Anakim. Okay, so all these synonyms, okay? They are all called Rephaim. Now, Rephaim is a very, very interesting term. Down in Deuteronomy chapter 3, Moses is recounting a battle that they fought against Bashan, specifically the king, Og of Bashan. And we're told this about Og, the king of Bashan. His bed was a bed of iron. Is it not in Rabbah of the Ammonites? You go check it out for yourself. 9 cubits was its length. This is his bed. And 4 cubits its breadth, according to the common cubit. Okay? Now, cubit is about 18 inches. So 9 cubits is about 13 and a half feet. That's how long this man's bed was. Okay? 4 cubits was its breadth, which would be something like 6 feet across. That's a big old bed. And we're told that he alone was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. Okay. So, all these terms are synonyms, and they're all pointing back to these Nephilim creatures, all right? The last of these critters, in fact, were not killed until David's time. So, for example, in 1 Samuel chapter 17, we find out about this guy named Goliath. All right? And Goliath of Gath, there's a little textual variant between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So there's a discrepancy. But he was either 6'6" or like 9'10".
Oh, my goodness.
But either of those noticeably huge compared to the average, human male in ancient times was maybe 5.5 feet tall. So huge, huge guy. And he is an Anakim. He's a son of Anak. Okay? Then, First Chronicles, you don't have to write all these down, it's just interesting. In First Chronicles, and chapter 21, we are told, no, that's not right. I've got the wrong reference. See? Let me find it. Just give me a second. Oh, I'm just one chapter off, chapter 12. We are told that there was again a war with the Philistines. This is the time of David. And Elhanan, the son of Yair, struck down Lami, the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And again there's war at Gath, and there's a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number. And he also was descended from the giants. Now the word for giants there in Hebrew is Rapha, as in the Rephaim. Remember how im makes a word plural? Rapha, singular, Rephaim, plural. So, when he taunted Israel, Jonathan the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, struck him down. And so David's mighty men basically hunted down the last of these Rephaim creatures. Now, so why does all of that matter? Well, these beings, the word Rephaim, either means giants, or in other places it appears to mean something like ghosts, or shades, or spirits, or diminished shadow things. Okay? So, Isaiah 14. This is a passage we'll refer to at another time for another reason. But Isaiah 14 is a chapter where there's a taunt that's turned into a song. It's called a mashal song, and it's a song that's meant to taunt and mock a human arrogant king, in this case the king of Babylon. And it does, the format of this kind of poem in Hebrew is that it does that by comparing that king to someone else who has fallen. So both Isaiah 14 and there's a passage in Ezekiel 32 where we're told that basically the comparison is made from a human king to like the devil, who mighty creature, the morning star. This is where you find these passages describing how beautiful and wondrous and majestic and mighty, Satan was. And then he fell. And the taunt is meant to say to this human king, you are certainly not more powerful than that being, and you therefore are also going to fall. Okay, so that's the whole idea. And then look what is said here, though, about this king. The prophet says, Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come, and it rouses the Rephaim, the shades here, to greet you. All who were leaders of the earth. It raises from their thrones all who were kings of the nations. And all of them will say, will answer and say to you, you too have become as weak as we have. You have become like us. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol, the sound of your harp. Okay, and it goes on and on about this. So you've got a similar passage in Isaiah 26. Oh, that's 36. And the people of Israel, they say, O Lord our God, other lords besides you have ruled over us, but your name will only bring to remembrance. They are dead, they will not live. They are Rephaim, they are shades. They will not rise. To that end, you have visited them with destruction and wiped out all remembrance of them. So, okay, this is an interesting, so what's going on here? Well, there's one more piece that we're going to go on just a slight rabbit trail here. The Bible also tells us that it is possible to contact the realm of the dead. That there is some kind of contact or connection possible between the physical realm and the spiritual realm in general, or the realm of the dead in particular. And again, this has to do very practically with things today, where people do this. If we go to 1 Samuel 28, this is such a sad story. This is literally Saul. King Saul at his very worst, darkest day. So, you have to read all of Saul's life to see what happened there. God made him king, and then Saul rejected God's authority. Saul can't listen to anyone else but Saul. That's his main problem. In that way, he just totally follows the serpent. Remember what the serpent told Eve? He didn't say to Eve, don't listen to God, listen to me. He said to Eve, don't listen to God, listen to yourself. And that's the whole thing. And this is Saul. And his life is, anytime that there's some disconnect between what God has told him to do and what seems to him to be right to do, he always does what he thinks. And as a consequence, he rejects God's authority, he disobeys him, and he rebels against God. And God judges him and disciplines him by taking the kingdom away from Saul. But he doesn't do it all at once. And so Saul basically serves out the rest of his reign, but without God. And we'll look in a couple weeks, maybe next week, at a really weird story where God sends a spirit to torment Saul, and we'll look at that story. But in any case, by the end here, end of Saul's life, God doesn't talk to Saul anymore. And it's because Saul has never actually really wanted to hear God's voice. But Saul here is now faced with the Philistines gathered for war, and he's terrified. And so, and we're told here, little parenthetical note, Samuel had died. And all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. And Saul had put mediums and necromancers out of the land. The Philistines assembled, they came and encamped at Shunem, and Saul gathered all Israel. See how those details are totally disconnected from the narrative? You're like, why are you telling us this? Well, it'll become like that. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. So he inquired of Yahweh. But when he did so, Yahweh did not answer him, either by dreams, or by Urim, or by the prophets. And so Saul, in his fear, he says to his servants, seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go and inquire of her. And they say, there's a medium at Endor. So Saul disguised himself, he put on other garments, he went, okay, and he says to this woman, divine for me a spirit, and bring up for me whoever I shall name to you. And she thinks he's trying to trick her. You know what Saul has done. You're going to give me a death sentence on this. But Saul swore, as Yahweh lives, no punishment will come upon you for this thing. So she said, who will I bring up for you? And he said, bring up Samuel for me. Okay, so then she does. Right? Like that's what the text says. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried cried out with a loud voice. So it's almost like, it might be that this woman was kind of a charlatan, but then, like, the real deal happened. Because she's surprised by all the, and somehow she recognizes that this is Samuel, and then somehow from that draws a conclusion that she is in fact talking to Saul. Okay? So she says, "You're Saul, why have you deceived me?" The king said to her, "Do not be afraid, what do you see?" So this is an interesting thing. Saul does not see what she sees, presumably. And then she says, "I see a God coming up out of the earth." And he said to her, "What does he look like?" She said, "He's an old man coming up wrapped in a robe." And Saul knew that it was Samuel. And he bowed with his face to the ground and paid homage. Then Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" And Saul answered, "I'm in great distress. The Philistines are warning me." He assumes Samuel doesn't know what's going on in the land of, so he gives him an update on the local news. The Philistines are coming after us again, and God doesn't talk to me anymore. So I've summoned you to tell me what to do. Which is super funny, because he's never listened to Samuel before. But Samuel says, "Why do you ask me, since Yahweh God has turned from you and become your enemy?" So, and then Samuel just says, he just like picks up right where he left off before he died, telling Saul the same thing he's always told him. You didn't obey the Lord, and so he's taken the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. But then he says, moreover, Yahweh will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Oh, and then within 24 hours, Saul and his sons are dead. It's a horrifying story, really. So, it's like, what is going on here? So Saul's doing something that the Torah had prohibited repeatedly. Okay, so Leviticus chapter 19, for example. People of Israel told, "Do not turn to mediums or necromancers, do not seek them out, and so make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord your God." Same prohibition is stated in Leviticus 20, Deuteronomy 18, Exodus 22, like it's just all over the place. And one of the interesting things, go back to the story, the Torah did not prohibit these activities because they were fictional and impossible. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So again, some people, it's like, this is one of the questions. Can people, like, is the occult real? And the answer to that is yes. Now, also, there's a whole bunch of charlatans and frauds and everything as well. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing there at all. God does not tell his people, don't summon the dead, because summoning the dead is impossible to do. He commands them not to do it because it is possible to do, but it's terribly dangerous and foolish and wicked and evil. Okay? Now, what's wrong with this? Well, there's one question that comes up in this story. And it's, well, here's the question. Did Saul actually contact Samuel? So there's three possible answers to this question. Some people say, no, he didn't, because the whole thing, it was a con. The woman conned him. I don't think that's the case. Okay. One, because she is surprised to see Samuel. The two other possibilities, both of which are very interesting, is that the medium actually did contact Samuel, or the medium contacted some other being that pretended to be Samuel.
Oh my God.
Well, I do have
So-
a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Because he said, for tomorrow you will be with me.
Mhm.
Would Samuel and Saul be in the same place together?
Well, and it depends on what, that's a little bit of an ambiguous statement, because, right, it begs the question, where precisely is that,
Is
Samuel?
that,
Yeah.
yeah.
If he
they
just
would be
means
together.
dead, then sure. But, yeah, right, that's the question. Yeah, it's unknown. It's unknown. I don't think, there's a part of me that's like, well, it sure seems like Samuel. doesn't it? I mean, he's pretty much saying what Samuel always said. At the same time, it's impossible to tell. And I actually think that's the point. I think the reason God tells his people, do not do mediums, is because you reach out to the realm of the Spirit apart from Yahweh God, and there's no way that you can tell who in the world you're talking to. There's no way. And in any case, again, the resolution of this story is that Saul and his sons, all of them, are dead within 24 hours of this event. So, now, what does that have to do with Rephaim, shades, whatever? Well, the idea of the shades, the Rephaim spirits, is that they are disembodied spirits of the dead Nephilim that do not go to the same rest that human spirits go when we die. Something like that. Now, why do I say that? Well, because the New Testament will say that the unclean spirit. Let's go to one more passage here to close out today. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 43, Jesus says this: when an unclean spirit, and pause it for a second, unclean spirit, the concept of clean and unclean that Jesus is talking about here is an Old Testament concept, okay? That's a Leviticus concept, clean, unclean. Clean or unclean animals. And in the Old Testament, to just summarize that, something becomes unclean when it is unnaturally mixed, or when it comes into contact with a dead body, or when it something that has to do with, so like women in the Old Testament, like after a period, women are ritually unclean, and the idea is that their body has undergone something that symbolizes death in some sense, and that puts them in a ritually unclean state. It doesn't mean wicked or evil. That's the difference between these concepts. Okay, so the ritual clean or unclean is not the same category in the Old Testament as good and evil, or righteous, wicked, or anything like that. But the idea of unclean is it's like anything that is to do with death, or even that symbolizes death, is unclean. And for people, when they become unclean, there's all kinds of ways that people can take a ritual bath and become ritually clean again. And that's not that big of a deal. It's a very big deal to come into the presence of holy God in a ritually unclean state in the Old Testament. But it's not like a wicked thing to just be in the ritually unclean state. But the concepts have to do with, again, death, symbol of death, or unnaturally mixed things. So like it's wrong and unclean. That's kind of the source of Israel's don't wear clothing that's sewn from two different kinds of fabric, because these things are unnaturally mixed together. Okay, so when you hear what in all of creation seems to express the concepts of unnaturally mixed and having to do with death, the Nephilim. So a spirit of the dead Nephilim is literally an unclean spirit. Does that make sense? And Jesus is talking about these spirits as though they wander, he says, through the desert, seeking rest. But they don't find any. So then they say, they come back to the house from which I came. It comes back, finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. And it goes and gets 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they in turn dwell there in the last day. That person is worse than the first, so also will be this evil generation. So, but the concept there, he is giving us an idea of what is a demon. I think a demon is a shade, a spirit of the dead Nephilim. And the idea is that, and now, I could appeal a little bit to some extra biblical literature, like rabbinical literature, and I'm going a little bit, just a little bit beyond the Bible. But the concept in the rabbis' literature is that essentially the judgment of God on the Nephilim was that when they died, he would not give them rest. That their spirits would be basically caused to wander the earth, and they could find no rest. So like they are disembodied, and they long to be embodied. So if you can think about this, you lived your life as an embodied soul, capable of experiencing all the good gifts of God in his material world. So you can eat good food, and you can have good drink, and you can feel the grass on your feet, and you all this stuff. And then God's judgment on the Nephilim is that when they die, they still are alive. Like they're still there, but they can't have any of that. They can't eat or drink or walk or lay down or anything like that. And I think then, the cause of demonic torment in the New Testament, when we see these spirits and they come and they enter a person, or in Matthew chapter 8, the story of the demons that want to enter the pigs, it's like, why do they want to be in a person? Or even, if not a person, then a pig? Because more than anything, I think they want to be embodied. They want to, and they'll do that by coming and tormenting and attacking a human being.
But they immediately threw themselves off the cliff into the sea.
Right, and that's a whole, so we will look more carefully at that story. So there's gonna be a few weeks where it's just gonna be like weird stories of the Bible part 1. And it's just gonna be looking at weird stories. But the point today is that all of these vocabulary refer to real beings and creatures, and all of them pose real threats to people. These beings can actually be interacted with. I'm not suggesting it, obviously, but they can be. All of these powers are real, not imaginary. Deals and oaths can be made with dark powers. I've not ever, as yet, counseled a person who has made an oath to a dark power. I have a professor at Western who has done that quite a bit. Talked with ministers in Portland, and has done quite a bit of work with people who have actually done different kinds of rituals and oaths and vows, and I think that if we are just kind of thinking shallowly, we think, that doesn't matter, because people don't do that, and it's like they do, they totally do. People will make deals. It's also possible, I don't know how, and I'm not interested in finding out how, but the Bible says it's possible to contact the realm of the dead. But the point of that story that I want to look at with Saul is that it's possible that the contact with the realm of the dead actually opens the door to demonic oppression. Because I think that they are both the spirits of the dead Nephilim. It seems to me that this is a little bit speculative, but that these beings exist somehow not quite on Earth the same way that you and I walk around on Earth. And there's some things that humans do actually that can open themselves more to the influence of demons. And one of those things would be seeking to contact the realm of the dead. So when I was a youth pastor, I would caution kids against doing any kind of stupid, like messing around dumb games with like occult stuff. Because I think that that's a real thing. And I think that you knock on the door of the realm of the spirit and you have no way of knowing who answers it. And I would bet my life savings that whoever does answer it is not benevolent. So, now lastly, the only other piece here is that by way of reminder, the thing to keep in mind of the whole thing when we see in the New Testament that Jesus has disarmed all of the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame, triumphing over them in the cross, when we see that he's been exalted to the highest place, far above all Roman authority, what that means very practically here is that the very second that a person places their faith in Jesus Christ, every vow, oath, deal that they have ever made to any other dark power is immediately voided. There's no oath, there's no authority, actual authority, that a demon or a false god or unclean spirit or fallen angel or whatever term you want to use, there's no authority that they can exercise legitimately over a believer in Jesus. The second that a person belongs to Christ, let me just...
What about the opposite of that? That they belong to Christ and then made an agreement or something at that point? Are they
That's-
forgiven for that?
Yes.
Or
Can be,
Yes,
not automatically though.
yes, assuming a repentance, faith. My point is, the power of Christ means that a demon never can supplant the power of Jesus legitimately. So how that would actually end up happening then is, let's say that a believer, well, let's sketch that out. How do you think that might happen? George, you're talking about a believer kind of makes a deal with a demon or something?
yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of these cults today, and I'll just pick on a cult, let's say. Somebody's been a believer his whole life and then somehow in his later years gets hooked into some kind of group and, one of these Halloween groups or something,
Yeah.
and joins that. What happens then?
Well, what I would say is that you've got somebody that we're knocking on another door there, and it's like, yeah, we'll leave that alone. A person can give their allegiance to a demon. A Christian, now it's a weird sentence to say a Christian can give their allegiance to a demon, because I would say, well, I don't think a Christian is that fair? Like, someone who really believes in Jesus is not, like, I wouldn't wake up tomorrow and be like, I'm gonna go seek out a contract that I can make with a demon.
Right, of course.
And why would that be? Because I love the Lord. I don't want to do that. So I would maybe say that, like, well, so the person who's making the deal with a demon, they might wear the name Christian, but it's hard to conceive of them as a Christian, really. Does that make sense? I wouldn't think that a person who has faith in Jesus, trusts in him, would then also be simultaneous to that trust in Christ, making a deal with a demon. That doesn't make much sense. But let's go at it like this question. Like, so we've got a young person who's grown up in the church, but they've really never truly given their heart and life and trust and allegiance to Christ. They've just grown up in the church. Such a person might look very much outwardly with other people like, they're Christian, they go to church all the time. But they may or may not be. Can they go get involved in some dark stuff, make a deal with a demon? Sure, they could. Then what would happen? Well, the ministry, the spiritual warfare becomes bold, courageous, compassionate, kind, clear, calm announcement of the gospel of Jesus Christ to that person. And then let's say they say, oh my gosh, I've been so far away from God, and I want to come back to God. And they give their life at that very moment that they say, I want Jesus. It doesn't matter what deal they've made, what oath they have made, it's broken, it's voided. It means nothing now. The demon might come back and try to deceive and say, well, no, you did make that deal, and it does stand, it does hold, and so you have, but that'd be a total lie. It's not true. That's what I mean by a demon does not ever have authority, really, over a believer. I'm not saying that a demon won't claim to have authority over a believer. He totally will. But he doesn't actually have authority. Let me give you the place I think that tells us this, and this is where we'll wrap up today. This is spiritual warfare passage. We don't think of it often that way. This is Romans chapter 8, verse 31. What shall we say to these things? Which things? the gospel. Right? 8 chapters of the gospel. That's which things. If God is for us, who can be against us? Well, lots of people can be against us, right? The devil's against us. What's his point there? Well, no one can really be against us. He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? Who will bring any accusation against God's elect? Well, lots of people bring an accusation. I often accuse myself. Or other people accuse me. You know. But the answer to the question, the rhetorical point is, well, maybe lots of people bring it, but none of those matter. There's only one courtroom, right? And the only verdict that matters in that courtroom is the verdict in Christ of not guilty. It is God who justifies. Who is to condemn? Christ Jesus is the one who died. More than that, who is raised, who is at the right hand of God, who indeed is interceding for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all the day long, we are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. No. In all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels or rulers, that's not human rulers, or things present or things to come, nor powers, that is spiritual powers, nor height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. So do you understand there? That's spiritual warfare. Because, George, the question that you asked is so profound, really, because it has to do with then, well, how do you minister to a person who's being deceived, tormented, oppressed, lied to by a demonic power? The only way to minister to that person is with the gospel, because despite whatever a demon will say, because, hey, you made that deal with me, and we signed it, and you signed it maybe even literally in blood. The gospel part is that Jesus signed a better contract in his blood, and so nothing can separate us from him. Nothing. No oath that we've ever made, no vow, nothing at all. Okay, and that's a good place to stop. Any thoughts, questions as we wrap up there?
Just a saying that I heard recently on what that last part was about. You can take 100 steps away from God, but it only takes one step the other direction to be back with Him.
Yes.